As a licensed psychotherapist specializing in master's level counseling, I was working with a young man, around 19 or 20 years old, who was on probation for domestic assault. During our anger management sessions, he matter-of-factly stated that he punched his girlfriend because she had a smart mouth. I later discussed his detached attitude with his probation officer, who advised me to be vigilant, stating that the young man had expressed concerns that he could become like Ted Bundy. This probation officer typically steered clear of treatment programs unless his clients posed a serious threat. His remarks, however, left me feeling uneasy. The young man broke probation swiftly and received an additional few years, a sentence we all deemed acceptable. He had a disturbing aura. During my time as a medical student, I was tasked with examining a patient in the emergency room psychiatric ward. I entered clad in my short white coat and carrying my clipboard and inquired about the reason for his visit and his current state. He met my gaze directly, with foamy saliva escaping his lips and an unusual odor in the room, and declared, "The devil commanded me to kill you," followed by myself. His perspiration was heavy, his eyes bloodshot, and his wife-beater reeked of dark red and brown stains. The exit was just out of reach, and a sense of dread washed over me, the feeling that something terrible was about to unfold. I had no way of knowing if he was armed. The thought of calling for help aloud terrified me. I was tucked away in a secluded corner of the ER, and I feared that a loud cry would only frighten him further. I spent about 30 minutes with him, asking him further questions, before quietly leaving when he began to appear tired. During my initial psychiatry rotations, the most crucial piece of advice was never position yourself between a patient and the exit. This was drilled into us from day one. I recall one psychiatrist whose appearance was unsettling, with a peculiar hand. It turned out he had been attacked years prior by a patient who believed God had instructed him that the psychiatrist was Satan. The patient attacked him with a meat cleaver, inflicting serious injuries. Due to a patient's chair blocking the psychiatrist's exit from his office, the university clinic underwent a complete reorganization. The result was that the psychiatrist's office was always positioned closer to the door, with a desk consistently placed between himself and the patient. I'm a registered nurse on an acute psychiatric unit, not a mental health professional. While I've encountered some unsettling patients, one in particular stands out. He was a young, physically imposing man who perfectly embodied the traits of a sociopath. He could be charming when it suited him, but lacked any empathy, remorse, or sense of guilt, and was incredibly manipulative. He reminded me of Patrick Bateman from the movie American Psycho. I won't divulge too many details. I value my job and want to keep it, but he was simply chillingly cold. I've never witnessed a smile so chillingly cruel. That smirk was plastered on his face mere seconds before he attacked a staff member. Sociopaths terrify me because of their ability to shift from incredibly charismatic and likable to utterly devoid of empathy in an instant. I had a relationship with someone when I was 17. He was 19 and a college student, and I'm grateful things ended relatively swiftly. It wasn't until my first year of college, during an introductory psychology course, that I became aware of the condition. I'm glad to know you escaped that situation. It was a wise choice. They can be incredibly charming, a true wickedness concealed beneath a pleasant facade. My 6-month stint at a children's mental health facility was undoubtedly the most heartbreaking experience of my life. The 3 most disturbing incidents that occurred during that time were: a 16-year-old boy, standing at 5 feet tall and weighing 90 pounds, suffered from severe schizophrenia. During his episodes, he'd be restrained in a straitjacket, yet he possessed incredible strength, able to overpower a 6 feet 3 inches, 230 pounds male technician even while immobilized. His speech during these episodes was unsettling, almost sounding like demonic voices, making the situation deeply frightening. A 17-year-old girl, diagnosed with severe schizophrenia, would retreat to a corner, waiting for a specific staff member to pass. Upon their approach, she would insert her hands into her pants, retrieve menstrual blood, and forcefully strike us in the face with it. This happened to me multiple times, requiring me to leave work and seek medical attention in the hospital on several occasions, particularly when the blood came close to our mouths and eyes. Although I'm still in training to become a psychologist, I'm currently a clinical behavior analyst working on a pediatric psychiatric unit/school to fulfill my clinical requirements. During my second day, a patient experienced a severe outburst, throwing cinnamon buns and maple syrup at the staff. It required a significant response, involving 6 officers and the use of a taser to de-escalate the situation. Several patients exhibited unpredictable anger and emotional volatility, which could be unsettling at times. During a couples therapy session, a husband once arrived with a gun, threatening both his wife and himself. Thankfully, we managed to de-escalate the situation, but incidents like this can have tragic outcomes, highlighting the constant need for vigilance when emotions are intense. Although I'm not a mental health professional, witnessing my ex's deterioration was deeply frightening. He had recently begun taking medication, but for unknown reasons, it had a severe adverse reaction on him. Primarily, he experienced hallucinations, but occasionally he would black out and engage in activities without any recollection afterward. He would wake me up at 3 a.m., screaming uncontrollably, with no memory of the incident whatsoever. While he'd had hallucinations before, they escalated in intensity and danger with this specific medication. During a phone call during a particularly intense episode, he mentioned, "I boiled some water." Confused, inquired as to why at 3 a.m., to which he responded with a chilling calmness, "They told me I have to put my hand in it." The situation was utterly frightening. I pleaded with him to seek a medication change at the hospital the next day, and he reluctantly agreed. While at the hospital, he began vomiting blood and required emergency stomach pumping. It appears that during one of his episodes, he accidentally ingested the entire contents of his medication bottle. As a clinical psychologist with experience working in a correctional facility, I conducted a parole evaluation for an inmate who was a prominent figure within a nationwide gang. He claimed to be the highest-ranking member in the state, a position he said was assigned to him to maintain order among his associates. His criminal history was extensive and violent, and in my professional assessment, he exhibited traits consistent with psychopathy. During the evaluation, I discussed the nature of his crimes and assessed his level of remorse, among other factors. His account of torturing and leaving a man to die over a debt was chillingly matter-of-fact. He justified his actions with the callous phrase, "Live by the sword, die by the sword," as if it were a trivial matter. His nonchalance about handling his affairs, even from within prison walls, was unnerving. I believed him. After all, he'd only spent 18 months out of the last 15 years free. My advice was clear: do not grant him parole. I presented several factors to consider, and ultimately the parole board aligned with my suggestion. What truly frightened me during my initial parole evaluation, it was a nerve-wracking experience, was this individual's capacity to influence events beyond the confines of our session. I was certain he could have dispatched someone to my residence if he so desired. More seasoned psychologists assured me not to be concerned, claiming he understood the situation and wouldn't take it personally. However, I struggled to accept that. A few months later, I was leading a long-term offender group, and he was a participant. Following the initial session, I privately checked in with him, asking if everything was all right. He smiled reassuringly and told me not to fret. "I fulfilled my role," he stated, and he didn't hold any resentment towards me for writing what I wrote, as it was factual. He subsequently proved to be a highly engaged and perceptive participant in the group. As a criminal defense attorney, I've observed that many individuals within the criminal justice system recognize our existence, but perceive us as occupying a distinct role. They may understand that we operate within the system, but they might resort to violence for seemingly minor grievances, like being shorted $20, yet wouldn't hesitate to threaten me for simply doing my job. They shower him with cash, considering him part of their exclusive circle, yet they don't express outrage when the prosecutor sentences him to a decade in prison. This lack of concern from the prosecutor is a peculiar disconnect. A young teenager, exceptionally kind and largely blind, was experiencing his initial psychotic episode and had a passion for martial arts, specifically Taekwondo, as I recall. Despite his vision impairment, he was remarkably skilled in his practice, executing kicks with impressive precision throughout the facility. During one session, he unintentionally shattered a reinforced, shatterproof window in a secluded room. Imagine a padded room without the cushioning. It appeared these windows were indeed shatter-resistant, as his powerful kick completely destroyed it. What prompted the inclusion of these specific details? His constant kick practice, combined with his near-blindness, made for a dangerous situation. Once, while he was practicing a flip kick, I rounded a corner and the kick came perilously close to my face, just a few centimeters away. I felt the force of it against the air, as if something had physically struck my face. Despite this, he was the kindest person you'd ever meet. He would have been devastated if he'd actually hit me, as there would have been a lot of broken things. He unexpectedly tightened his grip on my arm and asked if I was interested in learning Taekwondo with him. My answer was a definite no. While I'm not a psychologist, my experience as a special education teacher in a high school self-contained classroom for behavioral disorders has given me some incredible stories. Though I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing the deeply personal ones out of consideration for my former students, the behavioral incidents were truly remarkable. A couple stand out as particularly wild. I knew a young man who was a psychopath, and his situation was incredibly disturbing. His father was incarcerated for abusing his younger sister, and the young man resided with his mother, a kind woman who was deeply invested in his academic success. Just before the father's release, he manipulated the young man into plotting to burn down their house, aiming to kill his mother. The young man attempted this act, successfully destroying their home, but he was unsuccessful in killing his mother and subsequently fled. I managed to alert the police to his escape route. Some months after his release from prison, the father went to the mother's residence and killed her by stabbing her, sending him back to prison. For years, I was unaware of the child's fate, occasionally checking inmate databases. Then, one day, I found him. He was incarcerated for raping a young girl. He has since been declared rehabilitated and released, now living freely among us. I have no knowledge of his current whereabouts. Considered rehabilitated, that's what the Illinois penal system is saying, fully mended and ready to be released. I sincerely hope he doesn't harm anyone else. To be honest, I'm a psychologist now, but during the gap between my undergraduate and graduate studies, I spent 2 years working at a facility housing male teenagers who had committed offenses. It was undeniably the most challenging time of my life. Initially, I trusted the staff and was genuinely eager to make a difference for the young man. However, within about 6 weeks, the pressure became overwhelming. The children understood that many of the rules were largely ineffective, allowing them to freely curse, threaten, steal, break regulations, manipulate the system, and engage in disruptive behavior with minimal consequences. On my second day, I witnessed a young person smash a steel door using a chair. The kids would instigate conflicts with staff and each other, deliberately seeking intervention and putting staff at risk. To make matters worse, I'm a rather direct and rule-abiding individual, and the kids realized I'd uphold the rules, leading them to resent me and single me out as a target. Chest pains started during my commute to work. Sleep became elusive at night, haunted by visions of the threats and restrictions I might face the following day. It's deeply damaging to one's mental state when someone can constantly criticize, fabricate accusations to get you in trouble, lie, belittle, and threaten you, all while you're essentially powerless to defend yourself due to the limitations of your position. There's no room for retaliation, confrontation, or defiance. The only leverage you possess is the ability to withdraw privileges, but the kids likely won't care. In the meantime, you're pouring your heart and soul into their well-being, providing for their basic needs, assisting with schoolwork, offering counseling, engaging in play, discussing life challenges, and tucking them in at night. You're effectively acting as their parent. Regarding your question, yes, I was fearful of several of the residents. During my time there, I was assaulted 3 times. 2 of these assaults were relatively mild, involving a single punch to the chest or face, but one youth repeatedly struck me in the head 6 or 7 times. One resident, who lived with HIV, would often use his illness to manipulate us when angry or in trouble, claiming he would die from AIDS and threatening to harm himself, potentially spreading his blood on us. We also had a significant number of gang members, all of whom were extremely unpredictable. My 6-month psychology internship at a youth shelter completely extinguished my passion for working with teenagers and young adults. I loathed every minute of it, and you articulated my feelings exactly. No matter their actions, you were prohibited from responding or defending yourself. Now that I'm searching for a job, shelters are actively hiring, but I'd rather take a position at a fast food restaurant. At least there, I have the option to call the police if someone becomes physically aggressive. Hearing you say that is truly uplifting. To be honest, it's incredibly validating. I've always felt embarrassed and ashamed that I didn't cope with it more effectively, especially since it seemed others managed to. However, I completely agree with you. I'd rather do manual labor or move back in with my family than return to a job like the one at the psychiatric hospital. I've made a firm commitment to never put myself in that position again. My position occasionally requires us to conduct psychological evaluations in a jail environment, which is the one task I'm unwilling to perform. Fortunately, my employer has been accommodating of my refusal. Kudos to you for prioritizing your well-being. Once, I had a client who had just been released from prison for severely assaulting a police officer. This client struggled with a volatile temper, a trait stemming from their upbringing in a violent household. Although the client never directed anger towards me, discussing their family and other individuals in their life would often send them into a rage, leaving me at times concerned for my own safety. To have a walkie-talkie with me during our appointments, I fabricated an excuse of being on emergency call duty at the clinic. Shortly following this, I ended our therapeutic sessions and recommended the client for a distinct treatment approach, one that differed from what I offered. As far as I know, the new treatment was proving beneficial for the client. During my training as a therapist, my tutor, an expert in childhood abuse and trauma, shared several disturbing cases. One particularly striking example involved a man in his mid-40s who had spent most of his life consumed by extreme paranoia. He believed his parents were orchestrating schemes to gather information about him for blackmail purposes. This man's instability was so severe that he was legally required to undergo therapy after engaging in minor theft, as he was convinced his parents were monitoring his finances. After 6 weeks of sessions, he started discussing his plans for the future. While his vision was somewhat unclear, he expressed having devised a method to escape his past and progress forward. My tutor, though cautious, felt optimistic. He had observed significant improvement in recent sessions. A week later, he returned, clearly distressed and lugging a sizable sports bag. My tutor expressed her happiness at seeing him and complimented his new bag. He then crumbled, revealing that he had a machete inside, intending to eliminate everyone from his past, beginning with his therapist, believing it would liberate him from his history, though he admitted she was kind and difficult to harm. My tutor, in a courteous manner, withdrew and contacted the authorities. The individual was cooperative. He had essentially abandoned his intentions by the time she exited the room. Despite feeling defeated, the police confirmed he possessed a large machete in his bag, along with his car being packed with garbage bags. She recounted this as the moment she felt closest to death, stating the lesson learned is to treat all clients with respect, as you never know who might harbor murderous intentions. This final point transcends client interactions, offering sound life advice applicable to everyone. While I'm a therapist, not a psychologist, my previous experience working in a facility for children and adolescents with severe behavioral problems proved invaluable. Even when confronted with aggressive clients, I typically managed to de-escalate the situation, and my personal safety was rarely a concern. In most instances, my worries centered on the client's well-being during these outbursts. There was, however, one notable exception. One of my clients was physically powerful and frequently exhibited extreme outbursts. Their behavior became unsafe, and there were indications they planned to harm another resident severely. As a result, I had to keep them under constant supervision within view of staff. In response, they charged at me, trying to choke me. Fortunately, staff arrived promptly and stopped them from causing serious harm. Another time, the same client disassembled their bedroom curtain rod and used it to attack me, swinging it toward my head. Luckily, I managed to avoid being hit. Surprisingly, our relationship was generally positive throughout the majority of our interactions, and I typically found working with them to be enjoyable. As a teacher, my most frightening/aggressive student was surprisingly also capable of being genuinely likable and friendly. It's a peculiar combination, to say the least. Over my 7 years of addiction, I observed that I could be the most caring, kind, and charming friend imaginable. And when you embody that persona, things often work out in your favor because people naturally want things to go smoothly. Why wouldn't they? I provided them with happiness, companionship, and affection, so I developed a pattern of things always unfolding positively for me. However, whenever I encountered a situation that required unconventional solutions or things didn't align with my expectations, I become incredibly unpleasant and hostile. Since I'm usually kind and agreeable 99% of the time, people find it hard to believe this sudden shift in behavior, often thinking they must be misinterpreting the situation. Humans can be perplexing. I'm relieved to be free from that dynamic. Appreciate your dedication as an educator. Working in a psychiatric hospital, your initial encounter with a patient trying to harm you is undeniably unsettling, though in most cases, especially in my facility, it evokes more sorrow than fear. During my time as a receptionist at a psychiatric hospital for adolescents, a father arrived with an alarming collection of weapons and drugs he'd discovered, intending to show the doctor. However, his actions necessitated his removal from the premises. Shortly after, the child under his care assaulted his mother. Although I'm not a mental health professional, I spent time in a behavioral center at 13 after a suicide attempt. One of the other patients there wore a helmet to prevent him from headbutting the walls. Whenever nurses tried to restrain him, he'd scream, a truly agonizing sound that made you want to hide and weep. He also had a past history of sexual aggression, which is why no patients were allowed to sit with their legs open. He filled me with fear. My goodness, I'm truly sorry you endured that. It's disheartening that being detained for one's own safety doesn't always guarantee safety. I sincerely hope you've found a more secure situation now. That's right. You're welcome. Psychologists, particularly in the U.S., often express more concern for their patients than fear towards them. However, there are numerous situations where psychologists are unable to provide assistance because the issues their patients grapple with stem from legitimate and well-founded fears. You can find a screenshot of a pertinent post here. Financial constraints often prevent individuals from accessing necessary mental health support, as therapist fees can be prohibitive. In my area, there are a few free walk-in clinics where therapists and psychology students offer their services voluntarily. However, due to the high number of individuals experiencing poverty and unable to afford traditional therapy, these clinics often face long wait times. Consequently, some individuals struggling to make ends meet cannot afford to wait in line for extended periods, as they need to work multiple hours. One of my closest friend's wife is a psychologist working at a renowned prison, where she encounters truly disturbing individuals daily. It's safe to say that her career path was influenced by Hannibal, and she embodies the spirit of Clarice as closely as anyone could in real life. Prior to being assigned a case, she's always provided with pertinent information, such as court transcripts and witness testimonies. She's listened to recordings of gruesome crimes and other disturbing events. She's incredibly resilient, and I believe she finds a perverse pleasure in dissecting the minds of dangerous criminals. Due to her growing unease, disturbance, and sense of threat from a client, she had to be removed from the case. It seemed this individual was either a serial rapist or a murderer. Specifics were scarce, but he possessed a recognizable victim profile, and she unfortunately matched it. His behavior towards her became increasingly odd as he tried to engage in conversation, learn about her, and build a rapport. He sent her letters, drew her pictures, and offered her gifts, all actions he typically took with his victims. Under the given circumstances, we did everything we could. His persistent attention left her deeply shaken and frightened, to the point where even mundane places like the grocery store became sources of anxiety. Even at home at night, she couldn't shake a sense of unease, all while he was incarcerated in a maximum security prison. She likened the feeling to a primal, hunter-prey dynamic, a strange and unsettling animalistic connection. She was removed from the case and underwent counseling, which she described to me openly and without embellishment. "It's a risk that comes with the job," she stated. Although she often discussed her patients in a detached manner, this particular case clearly had a profound impact on her, unsettling her deeply. It's clear that offering tokens and letters would be deeply inappropriate and a breach of the doctor-patient trust. She would have absolutely refused, in a very direct and unambiguous way, and I imagine some attempts were stopped before he could actually give them to her. It's been a decade since I heard this story, but it has stayed with me ever since. I specialize in working with individuals with special needs, all of whom are referred to our services. Therefore, when a parent begins by stating, "The school isn't comprehending my adolescent," I anticipate a more complex situation. This 16-year-old boy harbored a deep infatuation with several individuals who had shown him kindness in the past. He viewed them as his closest confidants, constructing an elaborate internal narrative of their unwavering loyalty to one another. Notably, in one significant instance, he hadn't communicated with the other boy for 2 years, ever since they had ceased their shared involvement in scouting. Driven by a schoolyard rumor claiming his best friend's girlfriend had been unfaithful with another student, the patient took drastic action, dousing her car with kerosene while she was inside and attempting to ignite it. I work on a farm. The grandson of my employer was seriously disturbed. His grandparents couldn't manage his behavior. They purchased him a .22 rifle, equipped with a trigger lock, and gave him the key and bullets. I secured the rifle myself, as he was only 6 years old. When he threatened to shoot me, I disciplined him, but he responded by lying on the floor and laughing maniacally. I discovered the weapon I'd confiscated belonged to his sister. Hours later, he emerged, armed with his own rifle, the safety disengaged, the bolt loaded, and ammunition in his pocket, intending to kill me for taking his sister's firearm. This type of situation was a daily occurrence for me. That year, I accumulated a wealth of stories. I told him to cease his risky play on the tractor's roof. He'd get injured, and I wouldn't stand for it. He began to descend, but deliberately flopped down, landing stomach first on the tractor's back. It would have been excruciating. He wailed for roughly 20 seconds before erupting into laughter. I'm sure he cracked some ribs, and I have no doubt he relished the pain. Upon lifting his shirt to examine for wounds, I was horrified to see extensive bruising on his abdomen. I witnessed him brutally murder baby chickens, first showering them with false affection, petting them gently, before mercilessly standing on them. He subjected the farm dog to such relentless torment that the animal would growl whenever he approached. At one stage, I had to physically intervene, preventing the dog from killing him. It had him by the neck, its jaws clamped down with ferocious intensity. He cried out in pain, only to erupt into laughter shortly after. Words can't fully express the level of frustration this child inflicted. He terrified me, and I'm someone who regularly encountered aggressive black Angus bulls on a farm. Everyone disliked him intensely, and I find solace in knowing he's no longer present. If you need confirmation, just ask anyone you encounter, psychologists included. My spouse and I cared for a group of approximately 12 girls, ranging in age from 5 to 18, all of whom experienced various mental health challenges. Among them was a 6-year-old who had a history of violently assaulting other children, even using a knife. However, during her time with us, she exhibited a bright, cheerful, and kind demeanor. We encountered girls with backgrounds involving animal abuse, assault, murder, arson, and violence, but the individuals who truly unnerved me were the master manipulators. While many individuals might engage in manipulation, none possessed the skill set of this particular girl. She had a track record of accusing men of serious sexual assault with astonishingly specific and consistent narratives effectively destroying lives and families with her fabricated stories. A general rule for men: never find yourself alone in a room with any single woman. In her case, I couldn't even share a room without my wife being present and cameras constantly recording our interactions. While I'm not a trained psychologist, I'm concerned about my cousin's increasingly worrisome behavior. He's displaying more and more manipulative and erratic tendencies. I'm particularly alarmed by an incident where he threatened to harm himself if a classmate didn't return his video game. Unfortunately, my family is unable to intervene effectively as my aunt and uncle also exhibit similar concerning behaviors. I feel compassion for my other cousin, who seems to be the only one unaffected by this dysfunction. My uncle possesses firearms. He brandished a gun during his threat, putting it to his own head. My family is deeply troubled. My experience has encompassed working with numerous individuals accused of murder, some even convicted of heinous crimes like triple premeditated homicide. Despite their charges, and in some cases, undeniable guilt, I never felt genuine fear towards them. Even those with mental illness retained a degree of rationality. However, working with a petite, brain-injured woman who repeatedly assaulted me, security personnel, and psychiatrists was a different story. Her aggression went beyond fighting. She bit and spat. This led to my decision to cease working with her. Following an hour of confinement, she'd regain her composure and communicate, only for her demeanor to rapidly deteriorate within minutes, leading to an assault on another staff member. Consequently, have I harbored fear? Indeed, of the individual most would deem harmless. During my final year of psychology studies, I had a unique opportunity to interact with incarcerated individuals. One such encounter involved speaking with a man in his 30s convicted of sexual offenses. He described his past actions, detailing how he would marry women and subsequently abuse their young daughters, typically aged 6 to 7. Despite the disturbing nature of his confessions, I was instructed not to judge him. To ensure objectivity, I had to sign a waiver to preclude any occupational therapy intervention, and I proceeded to inquire about the home environments of his victims. He claimed that some of his wives had children from previous relationships, and in one instance, there was a teenage sister, 13 years old, yet he insisted he would never be attracted to her. He would transport her to school, stating he had no interest in any of the children he encountered there, and would take her to extracurricular activities or a friend's home. During her absence, he would return and abuse her younger sister, who was 6 years old. He explained that the focus isn't solely on attraction to young girls, but rather on the dominance and power derived from the perceived act of mating with them. He's currently undergoing rehabilitation, but the unsettling aspect was my uncertainty about his genuine remorse. If he was truly remorseful, he was exceptionally skilled at feigning it. He willingly answered my questions, expressed regret, and I nearly convinced myself of his sincerity. Yet, when I encountered a man convicted of possessing child pornography, his "I feel terrible" was blatantly insincere and repulsive. My professors had cautioned me about manipulation, making it easy to discern his deception. However, with the person before him, it was either a case of being a masterful liar and manipulator or a sincere desire to improve. It was a perplexing situation. While I'm not a psychologist, my brother is one, and he confided in me about this particular case. It really affected him, and I won't reveal the individual's name under any circumstances. My brother established his professional practice in the same city I attended college. He collaborated with someone who was a classmate of mine. We shared a major in economics, and I frequently encountered him. He appeared quite conventional, sporting t-shirts and jeans constantly, headphones on, and reserved. The peculiar aspect was his carrying a laptop bag combined with a backpack. Around 2 months into his freshman year, my brother began seeing a therapist. He sought help for depression and discussed common issues, a sense of not belonging and difficulty connecting with others. My brother felt like his therapist's responses were scripted and rehearsed, as if he was simply reciting from memory. Following several sessions, a shift occurred. The individual claimed to be experiencing visions. He expressed an inability to tolerate solitude in dimly lit rooms. His roommate had vacated their dorm, exacerbating the situation. He described witnessing movements in the darkness, subtle, almost undetectable flickers at the edge of his vision. He confessed to feeling constant fear throughout the night. My brother was concerned because the situation had escalated beyond mere depression. The paranoia was alarming, leading him to believe the man might be schizophrenic. By late November, the man's behavior seemed to worsen. He began calling my brother's work cell phone, which my brother always kept with him at night, at around 2 a.m. almost every night. Out of fear for the man's deteriorating mental state, my brother answered the initial calls. He described it as terrible. His voice trembled with emotion. The man on the other end was barely speaking, his words barely audible. He could hear the man's sobs through the phone. This pattern continued for days. Finally, at their following face-to-face encounter, my brother expressed that he needed to withdraw from second semester and earnestly explore inpatient treatment, emphasizing the importance of prioritizing other patients. He recommended him to a health center and a more seasoned psychologist specializing in severe cases. Overwhelmed by the news, he broke down in tears in his office. For an hour straight, he apologized and sobbed, repeatedly expressing his fear with "I'm so scared." Following the holiday break, I didn't encounter this individual again. My brother, however, had several more conversations with him, which ultimately led to him consenting to inpatient care following a discussion with his parents. For months forward, it's April, and strange occurrences begin to plague my brother. He spots lights flickering outside his window at odd hours, not from cars, but resembling the beams of flashlights. Initially, he assumed it was inconsiderate college students out late, but the situation escalated. One night, he heard a rapid knocking on his door, a series of forceful slams, which he chose to ignore. Later that same night, his phone rang, but due to a new policy he'd adopted for late-night calls, he let go to voicemail. It was the guy, his voice raw with panic, yelling, "They're back! They're back! They're back!" he exclaimed, his voice escalating in urgency until it dissolved into sobs over the speakerphone. "I'm outside. Please let me in, please," he pleaded, his words laced with desperation. The message abruptly cut off as the sound of frantic pounding on my brother's front door filled the air. Following that incident, the man ceased all communication with my brother and tragically took his own life 3 months afterward. The reason became clear. Shouldn't he have called the police when he returned and found someone banging on his door? My brother resided in a neighborhood bordering the city center and the college, attracting a mix of students and outsiders who were often loud. He claimed he hadn't heard the screams, though. A contributing factor to his fear was his complete unawareness that a young person was outside his door until the following day.